Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am pleased to be among the few economists present here at this conference. A very interesting conference by now. Let's get back to economics because there's a strong interdependence between economics and politics. We cannot talk only politics, we also have to take into account the economic reality. It was very interesting, the topic discussed by the keynote speakers. Also very interesting, the topics discussed by my colleagues from Cluj-Napoca. As my colleague, I don't know, probably you and you presented the divergence between Central and Eastern Europe countries in terms of politics. I'm going to present the divergence within the Central and Eastern Europe in terms of economic performance. Before the beginning, I just want to underline that I'm not going to focus my speech on methodology. It's an adapted methodology starting from, let's say, classic economic school, but also taking into account what's happening in Central and Eastern Europe, which is a specific region, as the rector of the university presented at the beginning of this conference. There are very, let's say, similarities between the economic behavior between the Central and Eastern Europe countries and the countries in the European Union in terms of convergence in divergence and divergence in convergence. Let's get back to economics. So this is the content of the presentation. As I mentioned, I'm not going to talk many things about the methodology. Just to take this from... So the economic convergence, as everybody knows probably here, is very famous. Is the main rationale behind the European economic and monetary integration. Everybody has heard about nominal and real convergence. Nominal convergence was very important to qualify for monetary integration. Real convergence is very important for sustainable growth within the euro area. The Central and Eastern Europe countries are highly integrated with the European Union, or with the core of the European Union, the euro area, in terms of commercial, financial, investment transactions, either from the real economy point of view or from the financial point of view. This region is has been because continues to feel, let's say, the consequences of the Great Recession. This is the name given by the Anglo-Saxons to the crisis that started emerging in the United States almost 9 years ago. From nominal convergence to real divergence. This is, in fact, the topic, or the main topic, discussed at the European Union level. Because apparently there was a nominal convergence between the European Union member countries before the crisis, and we now see real divergence among the countries. Either we talk about the, let's say, developed countries of the European Union or the emerging countries of the European Union. Very interesting, all the countries in Central and Eastern Europe have their own model. There's no single model for the Central and Eastern Europe. It's like parking the cars in Italy. You know that picture, no? Like that, like this. So there's no model. Actually, there's a strong competition between the countries in Central and Eastern Europe. Many challenges, because Mr. O'Neill from Nottingham talked about European risks and challenges. Many challenges for the region. Short and mid-run challenges. Actually, this challenge, the spirit of the real economic convergence, it's a challenge for the whole European Union. Okay, structural reforms, everybody knows. Structural reforms are very hard to be implemented. In this introduction, a graph with the GDP per capita. and to see the distance. I don't know what's happening here, because I don't know if it functions or not, but I used to speak about this topic on many occasions, so there's no problem to see you at another conference. We see that Romania is the laggard in terms of GDP per capita. GDP per capita, it's a, let's say, famous real economic convergence indicator. Actually, it's not the best one, but it's the most popular, just to return to populism. And we see what? There's a big difference between the EU average and the situation in Central and Eastern Europe, with Czech Republic and Slovakia being, let's say, the most advanced to the EU average, while Romania is the laggard. In nominal terms, the GDP per capita in Romania, it's around 1/3 of the EU average. I put here in nominal terms and not in real terms, because if people from Eastern Europe travel to Western Europe, they pay with nominal euros, not with real euros. So, not going to talk about methodology, because I do not want to lose you. It's an adapted methodology, okay? I'm going to pass to results. And before pointing these issues here, I'm going to show you the graphs. Look at the potential GDP. So imagine that every indicator or every variable or everything in this world can be, let's say, divided into a structural component and non-structural component, or between garbage and non-garbage, just to use a less an easy speaking. Look at the behavior of the potential GDP within the Central and Eastern Europe. Here I selected the most important 5 countries from the Central and Eastern Europe. Interesting is to say that the compound GDP of these 5 countries, Poland, Hungary, Romania, Czech Republic and Slovakia, represented last year only 9% of the Euro area GDP. So if you can imagine. But this is not the point. We are converging. This is the first graph I want to show you, because I think people, it's important people to have something after the conference in mind. I mean, somebody said that what we know, it's what we have not forgot after we have learned. No, it's a saying. I don't know who is the owner of the saying, but we see here an important, let's say, convergence in terms of potential GDP before the crisis. With that overheating in Romania, it's the you see on the graph, okay? It's easy to see. I had to use the Banca Transilvania colors, so that's why there are only 2 colors, yellow and let's say black, or but it's important to see what, except for Hungary, which it's the l'homme malade de Central and Eastern Europe, not because I'm a Romanian, but in terms of economic behavior. So you know that Italy, it's c'est l'homme malade de l'Europe. Italy, you know that it's famous. Hungary is l'homme malade. L'homme malade is the I don't know how to find the it's the black sheep, let's say. Okay, from economic point of view, just do not misinterpret my saying. Okay, but you see that they diverged. Why they diverged? Because they implemented the policies to converge rapidly to the EU average salary. So when Hungary joined the European Union in 2004, the main objective of the economic policy of our neighbors was to converge the wages to the EU level as soon as possible. The increase of the wages determined the decrease of the competitiveness. That's why the Hungarian economy was diverging compared to the EU average before the crisis. But you can also see that the impact of the integration in the European Union, or the impact of the enlargement of the Western Europe to Eastern Europe, was positive for most of the CEE countries. Why? Because the integration within the structure of the European Union meant more capital flows, meant higher stability, including the political point of view. However, many capital flows that entered this region before the crisis were not, let's say, with a long-term vision. And what happened when at the outbreak of the crisis, a part of these capital inflows transformed into capital outflows. And all the region, as you see, faced a deterioration of the potential GDP. However, you see that we are now starting to see, let's say, the first recovery signs in terms of the potential GDP after almost 7 years of adjustment, with the most severe adjustment being noticed in Romania. You can see that amplitude declined from almost 7 to 2%. It's a loss of 5 percentage points in terms of potential GDP since the outbreak of the Great Recession. It's a very, very tough adjustment. You see here the output gap. Doesn't matter what the output gap represents. It's the difference between the dynamics of the GDP and the dynamics of the potential GDP. What reflects the output gap in Central and Eastern Europe is like parking in Italy. Yes? This is the, let's say, lack of integration or lack of common objectives in terms of economic policy. It's a divergence of economic policies of the member countries, of the CE member countries. Okay, and do you see what? We are in European Union. We have our rights. We go to Brussels, we sign the papers, the treaties, we turn back to our countries and implement the populism. Okay, this happened and is going to happen, unfortunately. In Romania, there's a risk at present, and the IMF mentioned recently at the annual assessment, that Romania risks to transform from the, let's say, the most rigorous country in terms of economic policy over the past years, because 2015 last year was a reference year for Romania from the economic point of view. But we risk now to pass from the very strong student, from the best student, to the student that risks not to finish the faculty. This is the divergence of the countries. Why the divergence? What happened? Every country in the region wanted to join the EU. Now my colleagues show that most of the countries in the region want to exit the EU. But this is very interesting, this graph. Total productivity factor. Long-term development is not done by helicopter money or by pumping or by public expenditure. It's done by total productivity factor. In order to get the passport for the EU, most countries in the region had to do reforms. You see, during the first time of the 2000s, of the past decade, the total productivity factor was on an increasing trend, or at least presenting a very high level. What happened after the integration? You can notice the downward trend for the total productivity factor. Why? Because, unfortunately, except for Germany, no other country understood the spirit of the real convergence. I mean, we are doing our homeworks, we get the passport. After we got the passport, we are equal to the Germans. Look also the labor factor trend. this is another graph that shows the divergence, the strong divergence between the countries in the Central and Eastern Europe. The capital stock on a downward trend. The evolution of the potential GDP compared with the evolution of the potential GDP in the euro area, the main economic partner for the region. You see that convergence before the crisis and the strong divergence afterwards. And this is divergence in terms of economic policies implemented by the countries in Central and Eastern Europe. Just to get back to these results, real economic convergence of the countries towards the euro area before the Great Recession. Why? We need to do reforms, we have to enter the European Union afterwards. Après moi le déluge. In a context of downward trend for the potential GDP in the Eurozone. This is called the convergence and divergence. It belongs to me. It's my postdoctoral degree at Romanian Academy. So this has already been published 5 years ago. The incidence of Great Recession. It was the most severe crisis since the end of the World War II, which was, let's say, a starting point for real divergence. Actually, whole Europe passed from nominal and real convergence before the crisis to real divergence after the outbreak of the crisis. More important to mention that the global crisis revealed the structural weaknesses of the CEE countries. Have this, I'm going to pass to the conclusions. I want you to, not to bore you with economics. These conclusions are also important for the European Union as a whole. I see here many students, many young people, the future of Europe. I believe in the future of Europe. Europe is going to consolidate by the crisis. If we turn back to, I lived 5 years in Europe at Porto University. I studied my master's degree there. I'm not, let's say, skeptic about the future of Europe, because it's the answer is simple. Why? Because the degree of interdependence, economic interdependence among the countries, member of the European Union, is so high that nobody, let's say, would risk to get the country out of this system, because the next day, that political leader is going to be, let's say, punished in the public square. Can you imagine the British people that have now are owners in Portugal? They have, I don't know how many cities there, or square meters or land, I don't know how to say, that they are going to show the passport when they travel to Portugal. Can you imagine that tomorrow the Canary Wharf would be depleted and all the banks to move to Paris or Berlin or Frankfurt? Or no, let's be serious. Geopolitical tensions, very important. Risks mentioned by Mr. O'Neill in the morning, in the first part of this conference. What's important to mention, a better cooperation from economic and financial point of view in Central and Eastern Europe. So many measures, populist measures, implemented already in Poland, in Hungary. Hungary is the, let's say, most affected by populist measures, especially in the banking sector. No far than yesterday in Romania, also the parliament approved the foreclosure law. These are, let's say, risk factors for the countries in the region. And the most important conclusion from my point of view, as a, let's say, researcher of European economic and monetary integration, since 1997, since I entered the Faculty of International Business and Economics in Bucharest, This is my passion. This I am studying, researching all day long, all night long, and forecasting for the bank, forecasting macroeconomic and financial forecasting. It's important to mention here the spirit of the real convergence. Europe is going to be, let's say, a competitive economy, not that mentioned in the Lisbon agenda, but is going to really compete the US economy when the spirit of convergence, of the real convergence, would dominate the region. Thank you very much, and I can pick up to 3 questions if you are interested to discuss and to combine this history part with economic part. It would be my pleasure, and thank you very much.